This man claims he died for 7 minutes during a routine surgery in 1987, but what he experienced in those brief moments would challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and what lies beyond. During his near-death experience, John J. Davis, a devout Catholic from a military family, was taken on an extraordinary journey through the afterlife that would shatter his religious beliefs and transform him forever. What he witnessed in those marble halls of eternity, from reuniting with his unknown deceased brother to a face-to-face encounter with Jesus himself, will leave you questioning everything you believe. But the most shocking revelation came when he returned an unprecedented ability that would burden him for the rest of his life, and a divine message that he was commanded to share with the world. This is his story, told in his own words, of what really happens when we die. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in July 1987, and I was riding my new motorcycle along the winding country roads outside Milwaukee. The bike was a prize my father had won in a sales competition, one of two. At 21, I felt invincible, free, the wind rushing past my face, but in a split second, everything changed. A deer darted out from the tree line, and in my panic to avoid it, I lost control. The world spun violently as I was thrown from the bike. The last thing I remember was the sickening crunch as I hit the massive oak tree, and then a searing pain shot through my right arm. The tendons had been completely torn away. As I lay there in the dirt, my consciousness fading in and out, I could hear distant voices, sirens wailing, but they seemed to be getting further and further away. The hospital lights were harsh and bright above me as the medical team prepared for surgery. I remember the anesthesiologist's calm voice. Count backward from 100. I barely made it to 97 before everything went dark. Then suddenly my heart stopped. The allergic reaction to the anesthesia was immediate and severe. I could hear the panic in the room, the urgent calls for epinephrine, the sound of the defibrillator charging. But I was no longer in my body. I was floating above the operating table, watching as they tried desperately to restart my heart. 7 minutes, they would later tell me. For 7 minutes I was clinically dead. But where my body lay still and lifeless in that operating room, my consciousness was embarking on a journey that would change not only my understanding of death, but of life itself. Growing up in a strict Catholic household in suburban Milwaukee wasn't easy, especially with a father like James Davis. A decorated Marine Corps veteran turned successful insurance salesman, Dad ran our home like a military unit. Everything had its place, its time, its purpose, including our religious devotion. We attended Mass not just on Sundays, but often 2 or 3 times during the week. The church wasn't just a place of worship, it was the center of our universe. Dad's approach to faith was as rigid as his military bearing. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, he would often quote from Proverbs, his voice carrying that same commanding tone he'd probably used with his Marines. But even as a child, I struggled with this concept. How could we fear something that was supposed to be all loving? This question would burn in my mind during countless homilies, but I never dared voice it. Our family photos told a story of perfect Catholic life: Mom, Dad, and me at various church events, First Communion, Confirmation, but they also held a secret. In our living room, tucked away in an old album, there was a single photograph I wasn't supposed to know about. It showed a baby, just a few months old, wrapped in a blue blanket, Michael, my older brother who died before I was born. Dad never spoke of him, and Mom would quickly change the subject if his name ever came up. It was as if his existence was a test of faith they'd failed. My childhood was a careful dance of meeting expectations while suppressing questions. Every morning began with prayers, every meal with grace, every evening with the rosary. Dad believed structure was the path to righteousness, and any deviation was met with stern correction. God is watching, John, he would say, his eyes carrying the weight of both earthly and divine judgment. I excelled at being the perfect Catholic son on the outside, altar boy, youth group leader, volunteer at the church food bank. But inside, doubts grew like weeds in a carefully tended garden. The God I was taught to fear seemed at odds with the one I felt in my heart during quiet moments in the empty church, when sunlight streamed through the stained glass and filled the space with colors that seemed to speak of something more beautiful than fear. At 21, I was at a crossroads. College was a possibility, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to study. The insurance business beckoned. Dad's footsteps were always the safest path. But something inside me yearned for more, though I couldn't name what that more might be. My spirituality had become a comfortable routine, more habit than faith, more obligation than devotion. The last conversation I had with Dad before the accident was about my future. He sat in his leather recliner, reading glasses perched on his nose, a copy of the Catholic Digest in his hands. The church is always looking for young men to enter the seminary, he suggested, not for the first time. When I hesitated, he added, God has a plan for you, son. Sometimes we just need to listen harder. Looking back now, I realize how that moment perfectly captured my life before everything changed, caught between duty and doubt, between the faith I was given and the truth I had yet to find. I was a young man living in a world of black and white, of clear rights and wrongs, of heaven and hell, with no room for the vast gray areas that make up most of human experience. Little did I know that in just a few days my understanding of God, faith, and reality itself would be completely transformed. The motorcycle that Dad won would become more than just a prize. It would become the vehicle that would carry me to the threshold between life and death, between the world of rigid certainty I knew and a realm of infinite possibilities I never imagined existed. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was how deeply the loss of my brother Michael had shaped our family. It wasn't until my experience on the other side that I would understand the full weight of this hidden grief. Michael had died in 1964, 2 years before I was born, a victim of sudden infant death syndrome. He was only 4 months old. The story of Michael came to me in pieces over the years, whispered fragments between my mother's tears and my father's silences. One night when I was 12, I found Mom in the attic holding that single photograph of Michael. She was so lost in memory she didn't hear me approach. The moonlight through the dusty window illuminated her tears as she traced his face with her finger. It was the only time I ever saw her guard down about him. He had your father's eyes, she said softly, finally noticing me. And the sweetest laugh. He would giggle every morning when the sun hit his crib. That was all she could manage before carefully placing the photo back in its hiding place. We never spoke of that moment again, but it haunted me. How does a family carry such a profound loss without breaking? Dad's response to Michael's death was to throw himself deeper into his faith and military discipline. The more it hurt, the more rigid he became. Our home ran on precision and prayer, as if enough structure could prevent any more tragedy from slipping through. Every morning at exactly 6:15 a.m., he would lead us in prayer. Every Sunday, front pew, right side of the church, no exceptions. Even illness wasn't an excuse to miss Mass. What I didn't understand then was that Dad's strict adherence to Catholic doctrine wasn't just faith, it was his shield against uncertainty. If he could just follow every rule, fulfill every obligation, then maybe he could protect his family from further loss. His favorite Bible verse was Job 1:21, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. He would repeat it like a mantra, especially on difficult days. The ghost of Michael lived in the spaces between our words, in the empty chair at our dinner table that Dad never allowed to be removed, in the way Mom would sometimes buy 2 of everything when shopping for my baby clothes, only to return 1 item the next day. He lived in Dad's inability to look at other people's babies, in the way he would turn away from young families at church. I grew up feeling like I was living for 2, trying to be good enough to make up for the loss of the brother I never knew. Every achievement, every milestone was marked by an unspoken comparison. Would Michael have done better? Would he have made Dad proud in ways I couldn't? These questions were never voiced but always present, like prayers without words. The weight of Michael's absence shaped my relationship with God long before I understood how or why. How could a loving God take a baby from parents who were so devoted? This question lay beneath all my other doubts about faith, though I never dared to articulate it. Instead, I learned to smile and nod, to be the good Catholic son, to carry my family's unspoken grief as my own. Little did I know that Michael wasn't as far away as we thought, that somewhere beyond the veil between life and death he had been watching, waiting, growing. That one day, in the most extraordinary circumstances, I would meet the brother I never knew, and he would help me understand not just the nature of death, but the infinite depth of God's love that my father's rigid faith had never quite captured. The fluorescent lights of Milwaukee General Hospital buzzed overhead as they wheeled me into pre-op. The motorcycle accident had left my right arm mangled, the tendons completely torn away. I remember the antiseptic smell, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, and the quiet efficiency of the medical team as they prepared for what should have been a routine surgery. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the surgeon, had a kind face and steady hands as she explained the procedure. "We'll reattach the tendons and repair any additional damage we find," she said, marking my arm with a surgical pin. "You should regain full function with proper rehabilitation at 21. I had never had surgery before. The thought of being unconscious, of surrendering control completely, made my heart race beneath my hospital gown. Mom sat beside my bed, clutching her rosary beads so tightly her knuckles were white. Dad stood at attention near the window, his military bearing intact even in this sterile hospital room. "The Lord will guide the surgeon's hands," he said firmly, more a command than a comfort. I noticed he couldn't quite look at me in the hospital bed. Perhaps I reminded him too much of another son in another hospital years ago. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Marcus Chen, began explaining the process, but his words seemed to blur together. "Count backward from 100, he instructed as he inserted the IV. The cold sensation of the anesthetic entering my veins made me shiver. I made it to 97 before the ceiling began to spin. That's when everything went wrong. My throat began to close. At first it felt like swallowing thick honey, then like trying to breathe through a straw that was getting smaller and smaller. I tried to speak to tell him something was wrong, but no words came out. Through rapidly dimming vision, I saw the monitors explode into frantic activity. "BP dropping," someone shouted. "He's in anaphylactic shock." Dr. Chen's calm demeanor shattered. "Get me epinephrine." Stat, the room erupted into controlled chaos. I could hear my mother praying, her voice rising in panic, Hail Mary, full of grace. Dad's military discipline crumbled as he rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Stay with us, son," he commanded, but his voice broke on the last word. For the first time in my life, I heard fear in my father's voice. The last thing I remember was Dr. Thompson shouting for the crash cart as my chest constricted like it was caught in a vise. The pain was extraordinary, but strangely distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The room began to fade, sounds becoming muffled as if I was sinking underwater. Then my heart stopped. The monitor's steady tone became a single, unbroken wail. I could hear Dr. Thompson starting chest compressions, could feel the violent pressure on my sternum, but it seemed to be happening to someone else. Because suddenly, inexplicably, I was looking down at my own body from somewhere near the ceiling. I watched as they shocked my lifeless form once, twice, 3 times. I saw my mother collapse into my father's arms, saw him struggling to hold both her and his composure. Dr. Chen was calling out medications, numbers, instructions, his earlier calm replaced by fierce determination. My father, the man who always had an answer, who believed absolutely in God's plan, was whispering, "Please, not again. Not like Michael. Please, God, not again." It was surreal, watching my own death unfold below me. I felt no pain, no fear, only a profound sense of peace and a growing awareness that something extraordinary was about to happen. The room began to fill with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital. This was softer, warmer, more alive somehow. As the medical team fought to restart my heart below, I felt myself being drawn toward that light. The last thing I heard from the operating room was Dr. Thompson's voice time of death, 2:47 p.m. But I was already moving away, being pulled gently but inexorably toward something that felt like home. The transition was unlike anything I could have imagined. One moment I was watching the chaos in the operating room, and the next I found myself standing in the most magnificent building I had ever seen. The walls were made of pure white marble that seemed to glow from within, stretching so high that I couldn't see where they ended. Massive columns lined a corridor that extended farther than my eyes could follow. The first thing that struck me was the quality of the light. It wasn't like sunlight or artificial light. It seemed to emanate from the very substance of everything around me. The marble floors reflected it in a way that made them appear almost liquid, like walking on moonlight made solid. My first confused thought was I had no idea the hospital was this big. That's when I heard the voice, gentle but clear, speaking directly into my left ear. "Hello, John. My name is Alan, and I'm your spiritual guide." I turned, expecting to see someone next to me, but there was no one there. Yet I could feel a presence, warm and familiar, like remembering someone I'd known all my life but somehow forgotten. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. It seemed to carry differently here, as if the very air was more substantial somehow. The guide's response came with a hint of amusement. This is what you might call the orientation center. It's where souls first arrive after crossing over. As my eyes adjusted to the extraordinary environment, I began to notice details I had missed at first. Along the right side of the corridor, beautiful marble tables, each with seats positioned as if waiting for guests at some celestial conference. On the left side, equally spaced between the columns, were what appeared to be tunnels cut into the solid marble, each one perfectly geometric, extending into darkness. I watched my guide instructed, directing my attention to one of the tunnels. As I looked, an elderly man emerged, clutching his chest, his face etched with confusion and lingering pain. He just passed from a heart attack, the guide explained. Watch what happens next. Two figures seated at the nearest table rose and approached the man. Their movements were graceful, purposeful, and filled with compassion. They took his hand, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. As they led him to their table, I witnessed something extraordinary. His appearance began to change. The lines of age and pain melted away, his posture straightened, and within moments he appeared to be in his 30s, vibrant and whole. These are orientation counselors, my guide explained. They help newly arrived souls remember who they really are. You see, John, when we incarnate on earth, we forget our true nature. The counselors help us remember. I watched, fascinated, as the man stood up from the table and walked through an archway to the right into what appeared to be the most beautiful garden I had ever seen. The colors there were more vivid than anything I'd ever experienced on earth: emerald grass, flowers in impossible shades of purple and gold, trees that seemed to sing in the gentle breeze. That's where the reunions happen, the guide said softly. Everyone who has loved him is waiting there to welcome him home. The profound beauty and peace of this place brought tears to my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly at home. The rigid, fearful God of my childhood seemed very far away from this place of infinite love and acceptance. There's so much more to show you, John, the guide said. What you're seeing now is just the beginning. Are you ready? Before I could respond, I felt a gentle tugging sensation, as if my very essence was being drawn forward. The marble halls began to shift and change around me, transforming into something even more extraordinary. I was about to discover that this orientation center was just the first step in a journey that would transform everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. As we moved through the marble halls, something about my guide's presence felt increasingly familiar, like a half-remembered dream or a melody just on the edge of recognition. The sensation grew stronger with each passing moment until it became almost overwhelming. That's when Alan spoke again, but this time his voice carried a different weight, a deeper resonance that seemed to echo through my very soul. John, he said gently, there's something you need to know. I'm not really Alan. That was just to help ease your transition. The air around us seemed to shimmer, and suddenly I could see him, really see him. He appeared as a young man in his early 30s, with our father's eyes and our mother's gentle smile. In that instant, I knew. Michael, I whispered, the name feeling strange on my lips, a name I'd only ever spoken in whispers or prayers. The brother I'd never met, but whose absence had shaped my entire existence, was standing before me, whole and real and radiantly alive. Hello, little brother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been watching over you since the day you were born. I was there for your first steps, your first words, every scraped knee and every triumph. I saw how my death affected our parents, how it shaped your life. I've wanted so many times to reach out, to let you know you weren't alone. Emotions I didn't even have names for washed over me. Here was the missing piece of our family puzzle, the ghost that had haunted our home without ever being acknowledged. The brother who had died in his crib was now standing before me as my guide, whole and complete and wise beyond anything I could have imagined. But why didn't I recognize you immediately, I asked, struggling to process this revelation. Why appear as Alan first? Michael's smile was gentle. The transition can be overwhelming enough without adding emotional shocks too quickly. Besides, he added with a warmth that reminded me so much of Mom, I needed you to trust your guide before you knew who I really was. Some truths need time to be absorbed. Looking at him now, I could see echoes of our father's military bearing softened by our mother's gentleness. He was everything I had imagined in my lonely childhood fantasies of a big brother, and so much more. The weight of unasked questions hung between us. "Dad never recovered from losing you," I said quietly. "He turned to rigid faith, to rules and structure. Mom still cries when she thinks no one is watching. They keep your photo hidden away like a secret shame." Michael's eyes filled with infinite compassion. "I know. I've seen their pain, their struggle to understand. Dad's military training taught him to protect those under his command, but he couldn't protect me. It shattered his worldview. Mom's Catholic faith taught her that everything happens for a reason. But no reason seemed good enough to justify losing a child. They both retreat into silence because they fear their grief might swallow them whole if they give it voice." He reached out and touched my shoulder, and in that touch I felt years of loneliness and unspoken grief dissolve. "But you need to understand something, John. My death, as painful as it was for our family, was not a punishment. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was simply my time to return home. Every soul has its own path, its own journey. And now I ask, my voice trembling, is this my time too? Is that why you're here?" Michael's expression grew serious. "That's not for me to decide. But I am here to show you things you need to see, truths you need to understand. What you do with them, that will be your choice." The marble halls around us seemed to pulse with living light as he spoke, as if responding to the weight of this moment. Here I was, having a conversation I'd dreamed of my entire life, with a brother I'd never known but always missed. The profound implications of his presence, of his role as my guide, were just beginning to sink in. "We have much to see," Michael said, gesturing toward a doorway that seemed to materialize from the light itself. "Are you ready to understand why everything happened the way it did? To see the bigger picture that Mom and Dad couldn't comprehend in their grief?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we moved forward together, I realized that this journey was about to become much more than a near-death experience. It was becoming a family reunion, a healing of generational wounds, and perhaps most importantly, a chance to understand the divine love that existed far beyond the confines of my father's rigid faith. Michael led me through the doorway into what appeared to be a vast circular chamber that seemed to defy the laws of physics as I understood them. The ceiling, if there was one, disappeared into infinite light above us. The walls were lined with what looked like thousands of shimmering portals, each one pulsing with its own unique rhythm of light. "This," Michael explained, his voice filled with reverence, "is the Hall of Life Purposes. Every soul that comes to Earth chooses its path here before incarnating." He guided me to one of the portals, which brightened at our approach. "Look," he said softly, "this is yours." As I gazed into the portal, I saw myself as a pure being of light, planning my life with a council of wise entities. I watched in amazement as we discussed the lessons I wanted to learn, the challenges I needed to face, and even the family I would be born into. Most surprisingly, I saw myself specifically choosing to be born into a family grieving the loss of a child. "You chose our family deliberately," I asked, stunned by this revelation. "But why would anyone choose such pain?" Michael's smile was gentle but knowing. "Because, little brother, you wanted to learn about the deepest kind of love, the kind that persists even through grief and loss. You wanted to understand how faith can be both a shelter and a prison. And yes, you chose to be born into our family specifically because of my death. Not in spite of it." The scene shifted, and I saw our father in his younger days, vital and strong in his Marine uniform, but with tears streaming down his face as he held my mother at my brother's funeral. Dad's rigid faith. Michael explained, his need for structure and control. "These weren't flaws, John. They were his way of loving us, of trying to protect us from a world that had already taken one son from him." As we moved through the hall, other portals lit up, showing me glimpses of lives being planned, souls choosing their paths. I saw people deliberately choosing lives of hardship, of challenge, even of tragedy. But why, I asked, overwhelmed by the implications. Why choose suffering? "Because the greatest growth comes from overcoming the greatest challenges," Michael replied. "Earth is like a spiritual gymnasium. Souls go there to strengthen themselves through adversity. But remember, what seems like decades of suffering on Earth is but a moment in eternal time." We stopped before another portal, and I saw my own hospital room frozen in time. My body lay there, surrounded by the medical team, still working desperately to revive me. My parents stood huddled together, their faces masks of anguish. "Look closely," Michael instructed. I saw something I hadn't noticed before: streams of light connecting everyone in the room. Golden threads of love and concern flowed from the medical team to my lifeless body. Brilliant bonds of parental love enveloped me from my parents. Even Dr. Chen, who I had only met today, was connected to me by threads of compassionate care. "This is the truth that Dad's rigid Catholicism couldn't quite capture," Michael said. "It's not about rules or fear or unworthiness. It's all about love, different kinds of love, different expressions of love, but always love. Even the pain Dad carries about my death is, at its core, just another form of love." The revelation hit me with the force of truth. Every scripture I'd memorized, every mass I'd attended, every rosary I'd prayed, they were all attempts to understand and connect with this fundamental reality of divine love. But somehow, in the translation to earth, this simple truth had become buried under layers of doctrine and fear. "There's so much more to show you," Michael said, guiding me toward another doorway. "But remember this: every soul's journey is unique, but they all lead to the same understanding that love is the fundamental force of the universe. Not the limited, conditional love that humans often experience, but the vast, unconditional love that God has for all creation." As we prepared to move on, I took one last look at the Hall of Life Purposes, understanding now that every life, every challenge, every moment of joy or suffering was chosen with purpose and wisdom that transcended human understanding. In that moment, I felt a deep peace about my own life's path, even the parts that had seemed most difficult or unfair. Michael guided me into a vast circular chamber that reminded me of a celestial IMAX theater. The domed ceiling seemed alive with shimmering energy, and as we entered, the space began to fill with what I can only describe as living light. "This is the life review chamber," he explained. "Here you'll see not just your current life, but the threads that connect all your experiences across time." The air around us suddenly erupted into countless screens of light, each displaying different moments of my life. But this wasn't like watching a movie. I was experiencing each moment again, not just as myself, but from every perspective involved. In one scene, I saw myself at age 7 teasing a classmate about her glasses. Now, though, I felt her humiliation as if it were my own, experienced the way my words had echoed in her mind for years afterward, shaping her self-image. "This is why humans are meant to learn empathy," Michael explained softly. "Every action, every word creates ripples that affect countless others. Feel how your choices have influenced the world around you." The scene shifted rapidly. Moments of kindness I'd forgotten, times when a simple smile had changed someone's entire day, instances where my silence had been interpreted as rejection. Each moment was accompanied by the full emotional weight of its impact on others. I felt the pride in my father's heart when I served as an altar boy, even as I saw his own inner struggle with faith beneath his rigid exterior. I experienced my mother's private tears, shed in the darkness when she thought everyone was asleep, missing Michael while trying to be strong for me. Then something extraordinary happened. The view expanded beyond my current life, and I found myself experiencing what Michael explained were my past lives. I saw myself as a monk in medieval Europe, dedicating my life to preserving knowledge during the Dark Ages. The smell of parchment, the quiet dedication of the scriptorium, the joy of preserving wisdom for future generations, it was all as real as my present life had been. Another life showed me as a Native American woman, living in harmony with the land, understanding the sacred connection between all living things. I felt the earth beneath my feet, the wind carrying messages from the spirit world, the deep wisdom of living in balance with nature. Yet another life revealed me as a Chinese merchant during the Ming Dynasty, learning lessons about wealth, responsibility, and the true meaning of prosperity. Each life had its purpose, its lessons, its growth. Notice the patterns Michael urged. See how each life built upon the lessons of the ones before it. I could see it clearly now, how my experience as a monk had laid the groundwork for my current life's questioning of rigid religious doctrine, how the Native American woman's understanding of universal connection had seeded my innate discomfort with the fear-based aspects of Catholicism, how the merchant's journey had taught me about the emptiness of material success without spiritual fulfillment. But why can't we remember these past lives while we're on earth, I asked, overwhelmed by the wealth of experiences I was witnessing. Michael's response was thoughtful. Think of it like going to school. When you're taking a test, you're not supposed to have access to all the answers. The purpose is to learn through the process of discovery. Each life is like a new test, a new opportunity to learn and grow. The scenes continued to unfold, showing me lives I'd lived as both men and women, in cultures across the globe and throughout history. In each one, I could see the golden thread of divine love weaving through the experiences, though it was often forgotten or obscured by the limitations of human consciousness. The most important thing to understand, Michael explained as we watched these countless lives unfold, is that every experience, every joy, every struggle serves a purpose. Nothing is wasted, nothing is truly lost. It's all part of the soul's journey toward understanding and embodying divine love. As the images began to fade, I felt a profound sense of peace settling over me. The weight of my current life struggles seemed lighter somehow, now that I could see them in the context of this greater journey. Even my father's rigid faith and our family's unspoken grief over Michael's death took on new meaning. They were not random tragedies, but chosen challenges for souls brave enough to learn from them. "Are you ready to see more?" Michael asked, as the chamber began to shift around us once again. "There's something else you need to understand about the nature of love and forgiveness." The chamber transformed into what appeared to be a vast garden unlike anything I'd ever seen on Earth. The colors were more vivid, more alive, flowers in shades I had no names for, trees that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. But what caught my attention were the souls gathering there, each radiating their own unique luminescence. "This is the Garden of Understanding," Michael explained. "Here souls meet to share their experiences and learn from each other. Watch." A group of souls approached us, each carrying their own distinctive energy. The first to speak was a woman who identified herself as Sarah. She had died in the Holocaust, she explained, yet her presence radiated not bitterness but an extraordinary peace. "I chose that life," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of profound understanding. "I chose to experience the depths of human cruelty so I could learn the heights of human courage and compassion. In the camps, I witnessed both the darkest and most beautiful aspects of humanity. Those who tortured us showed me how fear can corrupt the soul. But those who risked everything to help us, who shared their last piece of bread, who maintained their humanity in the face of horror, they taught me that love is stronger than fear, stronger even than death." Another soul stepped forward, a former slave owner from the American South who had chosen his next life as a civil rights activist in the 1960s. "Each life teaches us," he explained, "sometimes through our mistakes, sometimes through our triumphs. The guilt I carried from one life became the fuel for justice in another." As more souls shared their stories, I began to understand something profound about the nature of divine love. It wasn't the simple, sanitized version I'd learned in Sunday school. It was vast, complex, encompassing both the light and shadow of human experience. A young soul who had died as a child approached me. "Some of us choose short lives," she explained, her essence twinkling like starlight. "Not because we're being punished, but because sometimes the greatest lessons can be taught through the briefest encounters. Your brother Michael chose his short life to teach your family about unconditional love, even though the lesson came through grief." Michael nodded beside me. "Every soul here has a story of transformation," he said. "Every experience, even the most painful, serves the greater purpose of understanding love in all its forms." We moved through the garden, encountering more souls: a mother who had forgiven her child's murderer and found peace, a suicide victim who had learned the value of life through his death, a nun who had discovered that true spirituality transcended religious boundaries. Each story added another layer to my understanding of divine love's infinite capacity. "But why?" I asked Michael. "Why create a system where we have to learn through such difficult experiences? Why not just create us with this understanding already in place?" A wise soul nearby answered before Michael could. "Because true understanding cannot be given, it must be earned. Just as a parent cannot simply tell a child that fire is hot, some lessons must be experienced to be truly understood. The pain you feel over your brother's death, your father's rigid faith, your own spiritual struggles. These are not punishments. They are opportunities for the soul to grow in understanding." The garden seemed to pulse with agreement, the very flowers and trees resonating with this truth. I watched as souls came together and apart, sharing their stories, their lessons, their growth. Some had been enemies in life, but were now the closest of friends, having understood the divine purpose behind their earthly conflicts. Remember, Michael said softly, every soul you meet on earth is on their own journey of understanding. The person who causes you the greatest pain may be your greatest teacher. The challenge that seems most unfair may be the source of your most profound growth. As we prepared to leave the garden, I felt my consciousness expanding to embrace these deeper truths. The rigid boundaries of my Catholic upbringing were dissolving, replaced by a more profound understanding of God's love not as a distant, judging force, but as the very essence of all existence, expressing itself through every life, every choice, every experience. The peaceful atmosphere of the garden suddenly shifted, and the air grew heavy with a different kind of energy. Michael's expression became more serious as he led me toward what appeared to be a shadowy valley nestled between two brilliant mountains of light. "There's something else you need to understand," he said quietly. "Not all souls transition easily." As we entered the valley, I could see souls trapped in their own darkness, some curled in on themselves in despair, others raging against invisible constraints. These weren't evil souls, Michael explained, but rather souls so wrapped up in earthly attachments, guilt, or fear that they couldn't yet perceive the light around them. Watch, Michael instructed, directing my attention to a particular soul. The man had been a successful businessman on earth, but had died by suicide after his company's collapse had ruined countless lives. He was trapped in a loop of his own guilt, repeatedly reliving the moments of others' suffering that he had caused. "I don't deserve forgiveness," the soul was muttering. "I destroyed everything. Their lives, their savings, their trust." The darkness around him seemed almost solid, a prison of his own making. Suddenly, a brilliant light approached a soul so radiant it was almost difficult to look at directly. As the light drew closer, I recognized the essence of one of the businessman's former employees, a woman who had lost everything in his company's collapse. "I forgive you, Richard," she said, her voice carrying the weight of divine understanding. "I chose that experience for my own soul's growth. Through losing everything material, I found what truly mattered. Your action set me free, though neither of us knew it at the time." The darkness around Richard's soul began to crack, thin streams of light penetrating the shell of his self-imposed prison. "But how can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "After what I did?" "Because love is stronger than fear," she replied. "Because forgiveness heals both the forgiver and the forgiven. Because we're all part of the same divine tapestry, learning and growing together." As we watched, other souls who had been affected by Richard's actions on earth approached, each offering forgiveness, each helping to break down the walls of darkness he had built around himself. With each act of forgiveness, the light grew stronger, until finally Richard's soul began to shine with its own luminescence. This, Michael explained, is the true nature of redemption. It's not about punishment or penance, but about understanding and acceptance. Even the darkest experiences serve the light in the end. We moved deeper into the valley, witnessing more souls in various stages of their journey from darkness to light. I saw a former priest who had lost his faith on earth now discovering a deeper spirituality beyond religious doctrine. I watched as a mother who had abandoned her children came to understand the ripple effects of her actions and through that understanding find forgiveness and growth. But the most powerful moment came when we encountered a soul so deeply entrenched in darkness that it appeared almost solid black. This soul, Michael said softly, committed terrible acts of violence on earth. He believed he was serving God through his actions, much like Dad believes he serves God through rigid adherence to doctrine. Watch what happens. As we observed, spirits of those this soul had harmed in life began to gather. But instead of seeking revenge, they surrounded him with light and understanding. Each shared how their deaths had served a greater purpose, how their families had grown stronger through adversity, how communities had united in response to tragedy. "You thought you were doing God's will," one spirit said, "but God's will is love, always love. Your actions caused pain, yes, but even from that pain, love grew. We're here to help you understand that now." Gradually, the darkness began to dissolve, replaced by the first glimmers of understanding. The soul's transformation was slow but profound, like watching a sunrise in slow motion. "Remember this," John Michael said as we prepared to leave the valley. No soul is ever truly lost. The darkness you see on earth, the violence, the hatred, the fear is all part of a greater journey toward understanding. Even those who seem most lost are still part of God's plan, still capable of transformation through love. As we left the Valley of Transforming Souls, the environment began to change dramatically. The air itself seemed to become golden, filled with a light that was both impossibly bright and yet gentle enough to behold. Michael stopped and turned to me, his expression more serious than I'd seen it before. "What you're about to experience, John, is something few souls remember when they return," he said softly. "You've been chosen to carry a message back to Earth. Are you ready?" Before I could answer, the space around us transformed into a vast field of wildflowers, more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen on Earth. The flowers were unlike any I knew. Some seemed to emit their own light, others shifted colors as they moved in a breeze I couldn't feel. The air was filled with a harmony that wasn't quite music, but rather the sound of pure love made audible. Michael stepped back, and suddenly I was alone in this extraordinary place. Then I felt it, a presence so powerful, so full of love, that it brought me to my knees. A figure appeared before me wearing a white robe with a golden sash. His brown hair moved in the same unfelt breeze that stirred the flowers, and his feet wore sandals of gold. But his face was like looking into pure light. I couldn't make out his features because the radiance emanating from him was too intense. In my mind, I heard the words, "This is Jesus," and I knew it was true. Not the stern, judgmental figure from the church paintings of my childhood, but pure, unconditional love given form. The Jesus before me embodied everything my father's rigid Catholicism had missed: the infinite compassion, the boundless acceptance, the joy of divine love. He spoke not in words exactly, but in pure thought and feeling that translated itself into understanding in my mind. "Tell them there is no death." The simplicity of the message struck me deeply. In those 5 words lay the answer to humanity's greatest fear, the truth behind every religion, the reality that my father's strict faith both sought and obscured. But Jesus wasn't finished. The communication continued, flowing into my consciousness like a river of pure understanding. Every soul is eternal. Every life has purpose. Every moment is held in divine love. The fear that drives humanity, fear of death, fear of loss, fear of punishment, is based on a misunderstanding. There is no death, only transformation. There is no punishment, only learning. There is no separation from divine love, only the illusion of separation. I felt tears streaming down my face, though in this form I shouldn't have had tears to cry. The love pouring from his presence was overwhelming. It was like being embraced by the universe itself, like finally coming home after a lifetime of wandering. He showed me images, then humans throughout time, all searching for God in their own ways. I saw that every sincere prayer, regardless of the religion it came from, reached the same divine source. I saw my father's strict adherence to Catholic doctrine as his way of reaching for this love, even though his fear often blocked his ability to fully receive it. Your father's rigidity, Jesus communicated, comes from his deep love and desire to protect. Show him that love needs no protection, it is the ultimate protection. Show him that faith based on love is stronger than faith based on fear. The message continued to unfold. Religion is meant to be a bridge to divine love, not a wall to contain it. When humans return to Earth, they often forget this simple truth. They build complicated structures of belief and doctrine, trying to capture in words and rules what can only be truly known through direct experience of love. Then Jesus showed me something that made my soul tremble the moment of my brother Michael's death, but from a perspective of divine understanding. I saw how his brief life and early death were part of a larger plan of love, how his passing had set in motion events that would affect countless souls in their journey toward understanding. I saw that what seemed like tragedy from Earth's perspective was actually a beautiful thread in a larger tapestry of divine purpose. Tell them, he communicated finally, that love is not what they do, it's what they are. Every soul is made of love, exists in love, returns to love. Death is not an ending, but a return. With these words, his presence began to fade, but the love remained, saturating every particle of my being. As Michael stepped forward to join me again, I understood that I had been given not just a message, but a mission. I would have to return to Earth, to a world of fear and doubt, carrying this truth of eternal love. As the radiance of Jesus' presence faded, Michael led me to a garden unlike any we'd visited before. Here, among flowers that seemed to whisper ancient wisdom, I saw her mom, but not as I knew her on earth. This was her soul's true form, young and vibrant, free from the weight of grief she carried in life. She was tending to a patch of lilies that glowed with their own inner light. "She's here?" I asked Michael, my voice trembling. "But she's not. She's not dead." "What you're seeing is her soul's essence," Michael explained gently. "During deep sleep, souls can sometimes visit this realm. Mom comes here often, though she rarely remembers when she wakes. This garden is where she feels closest to me." I moved toward her, my heart aching with the desire to embrace her, to tell her everything I'd learned, to ease the burden of grief she'd carried for so long. But as I reached out, my hands passed right through her form. She continued tending to her flowers, unaware of my presence. "Why can't I touch her?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why can't she see me?" Michael's response was filled with compassion. "She's here in dream state, John. We can observe, but we can't interact. It would be too much for her conscious mind to process. Watch." As I looked closer, I could see tears falling silently down Mom's cheeks as she worked, each tear transforming into a new flower where it fell. She was humming softly the lullaby she used to sing to Michael, the same one she later sang to me. But here, in this space between worlds, I could feel the full weight of love and loss carried in that simple melody. "Every night," Michael explained, "she comes here in her dreams. She plants these flowers, one for every day since I left. Each one represents a prayer, a memory, a moment of love. She thinks she's just dreaming of gardening, but she's actually tending to the garden of her soul." I watched as Mom picked up a particularly beautiful lily, holding it close to her heart. "This one's for you, Michael," she whispered. "And this one's for John." She picked another. "Watch over my boys." The scene was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Here was the mother I knew, still caring for her children even in her dreams, still trying to bridge the gap between earth and heaven with her love. I could see now how her quiet strength, often overshadowed by Dad's rigid faith, had kept our family together through the grief. "She holds so much inside," I said, remembering all the times I'd heard her crying softly in her room, how she'd always put on a brave face for Dad and me. She never really let herself grieve openly. "No," Michael agreed. "She felt she had to be strong for Dad, for you. But here, in this garden, she allows herself to feel everything. Watch what happens next." As we observed, Mom began to sing more clearly, her voice carrying a wisdom she never showed on earth. The flowers responded to her song, their light pulsing in harmony with her voice. It was as if she was conducting an orchestra of light and love, each flower a note in a symphony of remembrance. I tried once more to reach out to her, to let her know we were both here, both watching over her, both filled with love for her. But again, my hand passed through her form like mist through sunlight. The inability to comfort her, to ease her pain, even for a moment, was its own kind of agony. "This is one of the hardest parts of being here," Michael said softly. "Seeing the pain of those we love, but not being able to reach them directly. We can send our love, support them with our presence, but they have to find their own way through grief. That's part of their soul's journey." As Mom's dream form began to fade, returning to her sleeping body on earth, I saw her smile slightly, as if somehow, on some deep level, she had felt our presence after all. The garden remained, its flowers glowing with the light of her love, a testament to the enduring connection between souls that not even death could sever. The garden where we had watched Mom slowly faded, and I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A gentle pulling sensation began to tug at my consciousness, like a tide trying to draw me back to shore. Michael's expression grew solemn as he noticed my reaction. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" he asked. "The call back to your physical form. They're still trying to revive you in the operating room." His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "We need to talk about what happens if you choose to go back." "If I choose?" I asked, suddenly understanding that I was being offered a choice. The pulling sensation grew stronger, but it wasn't irresistible. Not yet. "Every soul who has an experience like this faces this decision," Michael explained. "But with what you've seen, with the message you've been given to carry, returning comes with a special burden. You need to understand what that means." He led me to what appeared to be a reflecting pool, its surface mirror smooth but somehow alive with shifting light. As I looked into it, I saw visions of what returning would mean. I saw myself trying to explain my experience to our father, watching his face harden with denial. I saw myself struggling with depression, knowing the perfect love and acceptance of this realm but being unable to fully access it in human form. I saw the frustration of trying to put ineffable truths into limited human words. The hardest part, Michael said gently, won't be remembering what you've seen. Unlike most who return, you'll retain everything. The hardest part will be living with that knowledge in a world that's not ready to understand it. You'll see fear where others see faith. You'll recognize the divine love underlying all existence, but you'll have to watch people reject it in favor of rigid dogma. The visions in the pool shifted, showing me more nights spent in tears, wondering why I was sent back, moments of profound loneliness, feeling like a stranger in my own world, the weight of carrying truths too big for words. You'll have a gift, Michael continued, but sometimes it will feel like a curse. You'll see the larger purpose behind people's suffering, but you won't always be able to explain it to them. You'll know there's no death, but you'll still have to watch people grieve as if their loved ones are gone forever. I stared into the pool, watching these potential futures unfold. Will it be worth it? I asked. Michael smiled, but his eyes held infinite compassion. That's not for me to answer, but remember what Jesus showed you: every experience, even the difficult ones, serves the greater purpose of love's expression. The pulling sensation grew stronger. In the pool, I could now see my physical body in the operating room, doctors still working desperately to revive me. I saw my parents holding each other, their faces etched with a fear I now understood so much better. If you go back, Michael said, you won't be alone. I'll still be watching over you, just as I always have. And while you won't be able to stay in constant contact with this realm, you'll carry its truth within you. That will have to be enough. I looked at my brother, this soul who had been both stranger and constant companion throughout my life, feeling the weight of the decision before me. The perfect peace of this realm beckoned, offering an end to all struggle, all doubt, all fear. Yet the sight of our parents in their anguish pulled at my heart. Remember, Michael said softly, whatever you choose will be the right choice. There is no wrong path when all paths lead to love. The pulling sensation became almost unbearable now, and I knew my time for decision had come. I had to choose between the perfect peace of heaven and the beautiful struggle of earth, between remaining in this realm of pure love and returning to help others understand it exists. I woke up gasping in the hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights a shock after the gentle radiance of the other side. The first thing I heard was Dr. Thompson's voice. He's back. We've got a pulse. The room erupted in relieved activity, but as my vision cleared, I noticed something had changed fundamentally in how I perceived the world. Around each person in the room, I could see a sort of luminous aura. But it was more than just light. It was like seeing their entire life story written in the air around them. And with growing horror, I realized I could see something else: the exact moment when each person would cross over. Dr. Chen, checking my vital signs, had a soft golden glow that told me he had 30 more years. But Nurse Sarah, adjusting my IV with gentle hands, showed only 3 months of car accident I couldn't prevent. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest like a stone. You're a miracle, Dr. Thompson said, checking my pupils. We lost you for 7 minutes. As she leaned over me, I saw her timeline: 42 years, surrounded by grandchildren. But what caught my attention was the shadow of my brother Michael standing behind her, nodding solemnly. He was still with me, just as he'd promised. When my parents were finally allowed in, the gift or curse became even more intense. Mom had 27 years ahead of her, each one glowing with the light of love she would continue to give. But Dad's timeline showed just 5 years. I saw the heart attack that would take him on a sunny Tuesday morning while reading his beloved Catholic Digest. The knowledge brought tears to my eyes. Thank God, Mom kept saying, clutching my hand. We thought we'd lost you too. She couldn't know how those words pierced me, knowing what I now knew about Dad's future. Over the next few days in the hospital, this new ability refined itself. I could see not just when people would pass, but glimpses of their journey on the other side. The elderly man in the next room who died peacefully in his sleep, I saw his joyful reunion with his long-lost wife. The young cancer patient down the hall, I witnessed her transformation into a guide for other children crossing over. Michael's presence remained constant, though I could only see him in moments between wakefulness and sleep. This gift, he explained during one such twilight moment, is part of your mission. But remember, you're not meant to prevent these crossings, only to understand them and help others understand. The weight of this knowledge was almost unbearable. How could I look into people's eyes knowing exactly when and how they would leave this world? How could I carry on normal conversations while seeing the countless threads of life and death weaving around every person I met? But the hardest part was keeping silent. I learned quickly that people didn't want to know their departure dates, even if they claimed they did. When I tried to warn Nurse Sarah about the coming accident, she just smiled and patted my hand, assuming it was trauma from my own near-death experience. One night, alone in my hospital room, I saw Michael more clearly than usual. "The burden of knowing is part of your journey," he said gently. "But remember what you learned on the other side: there is no death, only transition. What you're seeing isn't an ending, but a transformation." Still, as I watched the hospital staff move through their duties, each surrounded by their own timeline, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of this knowledge. Every person I would ever meet from now on would come with an expiration date I could see but couldn't change. The true weight of my new ability hit me hardest when I was finally discharged from the hospital. Walking through the crowded mall during my first outing, I was nearly overwhelmed by the swirling timelines around me. A young mother pushing a stroller, 8 years left. An elderly man feeding pigeons, 3 days. A group of laughing teenagers, one of whom would be gone by Christmas. The most difficult moment came when I visited my childhood church for the first time since my return. Father Mackenzie, who had baptized me and guided my spiritual life for 21 years, was delivering his Sunday sermon about eternal life. But as he spoke about heaven, I could see his own timeline showing just 6 months remaining. The irony was almost unbearable. Here he was preaching about the afterlife while I could see his own approaching transition. During his sermon, I saw something else that shook me to my core. Around certain members of the congregation, I could see not just their time of passing, but the ripple effects their deaths would create. Mrs. Anderson's passing would lead her grandson to become a doctor. Mr. Peterson's death would inspire his daughter to write a book that would help thousands cope with grief. Each ending was also a beginning. Each loss contained within it seeds of transformation. One Sunday after Mass, a young couple approached me with their newborn for a blessing, a habit they'd developed since word of my near-death experience had spread through the congregation. As I held their baby, I saw his entire timeline unfold. He would become a great teacher, touching countless lives before his transition at age 82. But I also saw the trials he would face, the moments of deep doubt and pain that would forge his wisdom. The question tormented me: was it right to hold this knowledge? To see these intricate patterns of life and death but be unable to intervene? Michael appeared to me that night as I wrestled with these questions. "You're not seeing these timelines to change them," he reminded me. "You're seeing them to understand the perfect orchestration of divine love. Each life, each death, each moment of joy or sorrow is part of a greater tapestry." But understanding didn't make it easier. I watched as Nurse Sarah's timeline grew shorter, knowing I couldn't prevent her accident. I saw the exact moment approaching when my father's heart would give out, powerless to change it. The burden of this knowledge led me into a deep depression, until Michael appeared again with a crucial insight. "You're looking at it wrong," he said. "You're seeing endings where you should be seeing transitions. Remember what Jesus told you: there is no death. What you're witnessing isn't a countdown to an ending, but a transformation. Each timeline you see is perfect in its own way." Gradually, I began to understand. The timelines I saw weren't prison sentences, but sacred journeys, each one carefully crafted for that soul's growth. The young mother with 8 years left would accomplish exactly what her soul came here to do in that time. The teenager who wouldn't see Christmas would catalyze profound changes in his friends' lives through his transition. The knowledge remained heavy, but it transformed from a burden into a sacred trust. I couldn't change these timelines, but I could be fully present with each person, understanding the precious nature of every moment. I could help people live more fully in the time they had, even without telling them how much that time was. The moment that changed everything with Dad came 3 years after my near-death experience. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, he was sitting in his familiar leather recliner, reading his Catholic Digest, when he suddenly clutched his chest. It wasn't the major heart attack I'd seen in his timeline that was still 2 years away, but it was serious enough to land him in the hospital. As he lay in the emergency room, connected to monitors and waiting for test results, something extraordinary happened. His eyes suddenly widened, and he gripped my hand with unexpected strength. "John," he whispered, "I see him. I see Michael." For the first time since my return, I felt a surge of hope. Dad was having his own glimpse beyond the veil. I watched as his face transformed, the rigid lines of his military bearing softening as he experienced what I had known, that there was nothing to fear, that love was the fundamental reality of existence. "He's so beautiful," Dad said, tears streaming down his face. "He's showing me everything." "Oh God, John, is this what you saw? Is this what you've been trying to tell me?" I held his hand tighter, watching Michael's form shimmer at the foot of the bed. My brother nodded encouragingly, and I knew it was time for the conversation Dad and I had been avoiding for 3 years. "Yes, Dad," I said softly. "This is what I've been trying to explain. God isn't someone to fear. He's pure love, and so are we. Michael showed me that, just like he's showing you now." For the first time, I told him everything about the marble halls, about the life review, about Jesus' message of love. But this time, instead of dismissing my words as blasphemy or delusion, Dad listened with tears in his eyes, occasionally nodding as his own experience confirmed what I was saying. "All these years," he said finally, his voice breaking, "I thought being a good Catholic meant following every rule perfectly. I thought if I was strict enough, faithful enough, I could protect my family from anything bad happening. But when we lost Michael..." He paused, struggling with words he'd held back for decades. "When we lost him, my whole framework shattered. I thought God was punishing me for not being faithful enough. But now you see," I said gently, "Michael's death wasn't a punishment. It was part of a greater plan of love, one that's bigger than our human understanding." Dad nodded, his face transformed by understanding. "He showed me," he whispered. "Michael showed me how his short life was meant to teach us about love. How my grief, my rigid faith, even my mistakes, it was all part of my soul's journey." The monitors beeped steadily as we sat together, father and son, finally sharing the same profound truth. I could still see Dad's timeline, still knew about the major heart attack that would take him in 2 years, but now the knowledge felt different. It wasn't a burden anymore, but a gift, a reminder to cherish every moment we had left. "I've been so afraid," Dad admitted, his military bearing completely gone now. "Afraid of losing control, afraid of questioning, afraid of God's judgment. But what Michael just showed me, there's nothing to fear, is there?" I smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's what I learned on the other side, Dad. Perfect love casts out fear. Everything, even loss, even death, is held in that love." The 2 years I had left with Dad were transformed by his experience in that hospital room. Gone was the rigid patriarch who demanded perfect adherence to Catholic doctrine. In his place was a man who had touched divine love and was forever changed by it. Every Sunday we still went to church together, but now we sat in the back, smiling at the deeper truth we both knew lay beyond the formal rituals. Dad spent his final years sharing his story with others who were trapped in fear-based faith. He spoke of Michael not as a tragedy to be buried, but as a precious gift who had helped bridge the gap between earth and heaven. Mom watched this transformation with quiet joy, finally able to speak openly about the son she had lost and the grandchild she would one day meet again. When Dad's final heart attack came, exactly as I had seen it would, I was there with him. As he lay in his favorite chair, his Catholic digest falling from his fingers, I saw Michael appear, ready to guide our father home. Dad's face lit up with recognition and joy. "I see them both," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Michael and Jesus. They're here." His last words before crossing over were, "Tell them, John, tell them what we learned." So this is me telling you what we learned. The message is simple, though it's taken me years to understand how to share it. There is no death. There is only love, expressing itself in infinite ways through our journeys, our choices, our connections with each other. Every soul that comes to earth chooses its path for the purpose of understanding love more deeply. Some, like Michael, choose short lives that catalyze profound growth in others. Some, like Dad, choose lives of rigid belief that gradually transform into deep understanding. Some, like me, choose to glimpse behind the veil and return with a message of hope. The gift of seeing when others will pass no longer feels like a burden. Instead, it reminds me to treat every encounter as sacred, every conversation as precious. When I look at people now, I don't see countdown timers to death. I see souls on remarkable journeys of growth and understanding. Mom lives on, tending her garden and speaking openly now about both her sons, the one on earth and the one in heaven. She knows we're all united in love, that the veil between worlds is thinner than we imagine. Her faith has transformed from desperate hope to quiet knowing. To those reading this who carry grief, who struggle with rigid religious beliefs, who fear death or judgment, know that you are infinitely loved. The divine love I experienced isn't reserved for the especially holy or the perfectly behaved. It's the very substance of who we are, the reality from which we can never be separated. Every near-death experience is unique, but they all point to the same truth. Love is the fundamental reality of existence. Not the limited, conditional love we often experience on earth, but a love so vast it holds every joy, every tear, every triumph, and every tragedy in its infinite embrace. As I write these words, I can see Michael nodding in approval. The brother I never knew in life has become my constant companion in sharing this message of hope. Dad waits on the other side now too, free from fear, embracing the perfect love he once tried to earn but now knows was his all along. Remember, there is no death. There is no judgment. There is no separation from divine love. We are all on a journey home to a truth we've never really left. And when you find yourself doubting this message, look for the love that surrounds you, that flows through you, that connects you to every other soul on this extraordinary journey called life. For in the end, that's what my brother, my father, and my own journey between worlds taught me. Love is not just the answer, it's the only reality there is. Everything else is just the path we take to remember this truth. If this story has touched your heart or made you think differently about life, death, and the power of divine love, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Has anyone else experienced something similar? What are your beliefs about the afterlife? Your perspective matters, and this community grows stronger through sharing. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more profound spiritual stories and experiences. Help us spread this message of hope by sharing this video with your friends and family who might need to hear that there is no death, only love. If you found value in this story, please hit the like button and join our growing community of seekers and believers. Together we can help more people understand the infinite nature of love and the continuous journey of the soul.